to the edge. After pleading guilty to domestic violence, after admitting to a certified counselor that she could not control her rage, and after lashing out against her own daughter, the defendant snapped. And at what cost, members of the jury? The life of 12-year-old Parker Page. Now, at a young age, Parker was diagnosed with brittle bone disease, a disease that would force her to live a life confined by the fragility of her own body. And not only did poor Parker suffer because of this, but she also had to live with the pressure of her own mother, the defendant, showing intolerance towards her illness. And July 14th, 2018, was no different. Now, on that day, the defendant decided she and her daughter would go camping, and that she began their trip with a hike to the Leghorn Loop Trail. And every hour that passed on this hike brought more tension between Parker and her mother. In fact, throughout the entire hike, the two were arguing. Now, around early evening, just before it got dark, the two reached the cliff of Calkins Rock. And this is where Parker begged her mother to stop and rest. When this didn't work, Parker began to poke the defendant with her hiking staff over and over again, and began to shout things like, "I wish you had never got out of prison. I hate you." And this is when the defendant reached her breaking point. The defendant grabbed Parker's hiking staff, jabbed her with the chest in it, and forced her over the edge of the cliff. Now, the defendant's actions are why she is charged with aggravated murder. Now, today, we the state have the burden of proof. We must prove to you all three elements of aggravated murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, we had to show you that the defendant knowingly caused the death of 12-year-old Parker Page. Now, the first element is age. Now, members of the jury, it is undisputed by both parties here today that Parker was 13 years old at the time of her death. Which leads us to the next element of knowledge. We have proven today that the defendant's act of pushing Parker was done knowingly. Today you heard about the defendant's past acts of aggression and how in 2010 the defendant was charged with aggravated murder, or charged with domestic violence. Mr. Kai Washington, who was the social worker assigned to the defendant, told you how the defendant found it frustrating being a full-time parent again and could not resist the urge to grab Parker and shake her. After working closely with the defendant for 8 years, Mr. Washington told you the defendant could not control her emotions, especially when provoked by family. Now, the defendant's acts of aggression continued all the way up until her hiking trip to Calkins Campground. And as seen by Miss Kelly Deuce, the defendant's anger got the better of her as she ripped Parker's hiking staff from her hand and jabbed it towards Parker. And as Miss Deuce continued on down that trail, she heard Parker let out a blood-curdling scream just a mere seconds after telling the defendant that she hated her. And not only did the defendant have a history of acting out against her own family, but when jabbed with a hiking staff and shouted at, she was more inclined to do so. Which leads us to the last element of causation. And today, we have proven that the defendant's action of pushing Parker with her hiking staff caused her death. Now, the examination done by Dr. Quincy, who was the chief examiner on behalf of the state, confirmed what Ms. Kelly saw that day. Dr. Quincy completed a thorough forensic and medical examination, both into the body and background of Parker Page. She told you that the calculated time of death of Parker was between 4 and 6 p.m. And she also described the state of Parker's body when it was found and noted 3 key findings. 1, blunt force trauma to the head. 2, a fracture to Parker's left collarbone. And 3, a bruise on Parker's left clavicle that exactly matches the diameter of her hiking staff. And it was these 3 findings that led Dr. Quincy to the only logical conclusion. The defendant used Parker's hiking staff to force her over the edge of the Leckrone Loop cliff. Now, while the evidence brought forth on behalf of our witnesses are enough to prove the last element of aggravated murder, perhaps the most interesting evidence came out on behalf of the defense themselves. Today, you heard Mr. Lee take the stand and admit to seeing the defendant leave the Leckrone Loop with Parker's hiking staff. The same exact hiking staff that Dr. Quincy matched to Parker's bruise. The same exact hiking staff that Kelly Deuce saw the defendant jab towards Parker. Secondly, you heard from Dr. Lopez. And you heard Dr. Lopez take the stand and try to convince you Parker could have had a more severe type of OI. But members of the jury, this is not a conclusion that you can trust. Dr. Lopez has no expertise with OI. She has never diagnosed a living patient with osteogenesis imperfecta. You also heard Dr. Lopez admit that Dr. Quincy's conclusions regarding time and manner of death were completely correct. Lastly, you heard from the defendant herself. And you heard the defendant admit to the contents of this napkin. You heard the defendant admit, "I was just so angry. I'm so sorry this happened. I didn't mean to do it." Do not ignore the guilt that is so clearly spelled out on this very napkin. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to Parker Page is a tragedy. Parker will never be able to attend her first day of middle school. She will never be able to try on her wedding dress. And Parker Page will never be able to have children of her own. And while we, the state, cannot bring any of that back for Parker, what we can do is ask you to bring her justice. We ask that you return a verdict in favor of the state. We ask that you find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing argument for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to set up the welfare use of a demonstrative.
You may.
May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. The state has brought accusations, but they don't have answers. You managed to sit in those seats for 2.5 hours, hearing accusation after accusation after accusation against Miss Ryder. You see, opposing counsel just came before you and tried to paint her a picture as an angry mother who would push her own daughter off of a cliff. But it's our job as the defense to tell you what actually happened. You see, Miss Ryder had a hard life. At the age of 17, she had Parker unexpectedly. A couple years after that, her husband died, and shortly after, her parents died. The only support she had left was her half-brother Corbin Dallas. And she had a mouth to feed. So she made some bad choices. She began selling and buying drugs on the dark web for a man named Sam Fisher. Now, a couple years later, she was in jail away from her daughter. And when she got released from prison, Sam Fisher contacted her, asking her again to buy and sell drugs for her online. Now, Miss Ryder, she was distraught, but she couldn't go to the police about this, because as you heard, Sam's phrase wasn't snitches get stitches, it was snitches end up dead in ditches. So, Miss Ryder made an escape to Calkins campground with Parker. You heard that while they were around the campground, Miss Ryder tried to make it seem like everything was okay with Parker. Miss Ryder acted like nothing was going on, and she took Parker hiking up on the Lake Rome Loop. It was on this Lake Rome Loop. They had a small argument, but they came back down the Lake Rome Loop, and were back at their campsite. And after Parker wandered off for a little bit, Miss Ryder went after her. And it was then that Miss Ryder saw Sam Fisher. Sam Fisher wanted Miss Ryder to buy and sell drugs online again. Terrified, Miss Ryder told Parker to run. So Parker ran up the Lake Rome Loop. We're not exactly sure how she got there, but it's not our job to prove that. Miss Ryder tried to calm Sam down, talk to him for a little bit, and agreed to buy and sell for him, and that she would meet with him the next day at the marina at 2:00 p.m. After that, Miss Ryder started searching for Parker. She searched around the Lake Rome Loop. She searched around all the campsites. She went to the Beignet Cafe, but Parker was nowhere to be found. When she got back to the campsite 12, she waited for Parker and fell asleep for maybe 15 minutes before she was woken up by Detective Chesney. And after that, she shortly learned that her daughter passed away. Now, the state is bringing a charge of aggravated murder against Miss Ryder, which means that they have to prove that Miss Ryder knowingly caused the death of Parker Page. And we can divide this up into two parts. Knowingly means that Miss Ryder was aware of her actions and that she was practically certain that the actions that she would take would lead to the death of Parker. And now cause means that if not for the actions that Miss Ryder took, Parker Page would still be here today. And it's not enough just to prove one of these elements. The state has to prove both knowingly and causation. And what this all boils down to is the question of whether Miss Ryder pushed Parker off the cliff on Calkins campground that day. They have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. And this is the highest burden in our legal system. Think of a reasonable doubt as a brick wall, and every single brick in the wall is a reasonable doubt. And now the state spent the entire trial dismantling that brick wall, but if so much as one brick remains, you have to find Miss Ryder not guilty. So let's talk about some of those reasonable doubts and some of those questions. The first question that we have is in regards to the state. They assert that Miss Ryder took this hiking staff and pushed Parker off the cliff with the hiking staff. Well, this brings the question, if their case in chief revolves around Miss Ryder being pushed to the edge, why would she use a hiking staff to push Parker off the cliff? Wouldn't it make more sense just to use her hands to push Parker off the cliff? The state then asserts that Miss Ryder took the weapon that she just killed her own daughter with, and instead of making it seem like an accident, willingly walked down the damning piece of evidence back to her tent. And the state has to prove, why would Miss Ryder bring this exact weapon that she used to kill her own daughter back to her campsite? Well, the answer to that is because she didn't kill her daughter. And that's why she was so comfortable with walking this back down to her campsite. Now, you heard testimony from Kai Washington in today's case, and Kai told you about a couple of things that Miss Ryder experienced. Kai took that stand and said that Miss Ryder experienced rage blackouts, and stated that that means that she doesn't know what she's doing when she's in a rage blackout. If Miss Ryder was experiencing a rage blackout on July 15th, and if it's true that she pushed Parker off the cliff, then the state can't prove that Miss Ryder was knowingly causing the death of Parker Page. You also heard testimony from Dr. Quincy today. Dr. Quincy told you that some symptoms of OI mean respiratory issues, disorientation, and Dr. Quincy also took that stand and told you that Parker was not with her inhaler that day. It's entirely possible that Parker running up that Lake Rome Loop was experiencing those symptoms. You then heard testimony from Kelly Deuce. And Kelly Deuce couldn't tell you one time that Miss Ryder actually touched Parker with the hiking staff. Now, we didn't have to, but we also called some witnesses. The first witness that we called was Dr. Lopez. Now, Dr. Lopez took that stand and told you that it's entirely possible that the time of death could have been between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock p.m. Dr. Quincy overlooked a couple of environmental factors. And it's entirely possible that Parker was experiencing an OI more severe than what she was originally diagnosed with. And that's a reasonable doubt right there. If you can't be certain that Parker had OI type 1, and that's a reasonable doubt. You also heard from Cameron Lee. Now, Cameron Lee took that stand and told you that around 4:30, he saw Jordan walk down. But that also conflicts with the time that Kelly Deuce said that she saw Jordan and Parker. You see, Kelly said around 4:40 that they saw Jordan and Parker by the Lek Rome Loop overlook, but Cameron saw them all the way down here, 10 minutes prior. And there's no reason to believe that she could make this 3-mile hike in a matter of 10 minutes. That right there is a reasonable doubt. The timelines just don't match. You then heard Miss Ryder take that stand, and she told you all about the napkin and why she put what she did on the napkin. She told you that Detective Chesney didn't ask a single question about Sam Fisher. Kai Washington took that stand and said that Detective Chesney didn't ask them a single question about Sam Fisher. Cameron Lee, Kelly Deuce also took that stand and said that Detective Chesney did not ask a single question about Sam Fisher. Opposing counsel wants to paint the picture that Miss Ryder is a violent person who would kill their own daughter, but we have to look at the motivation behind it. Why would she do such a thing? Just because she had a random spout of anger? Members of the jury, this just does not make sense. Why would Miss Ryder, out of a spurt of anger, kill her own daughter? They then referenced a life insurance policy, but as Miss Ryder stated, it only was a $10 a month increase for that life insurance policy. Another reasonable doubt is the time that Parker sent this text message was at 4:38 p.m. You heard throughout trial today that there were quite a few spots that had spotty service. Miss Ryder took that stand and said her and Parker didn't get any service on the Lek Rome Loop, and the only spot that they got service was back at the campsites. Well, you can't send a text without service, and if Parker sent this at 4:38, we know that she wasn't on the Lek Rome Loop because there was no service there. That right there is another reasonable doubt. The state has brought accusations, but they don't have answers. Find Miss Ryder not guilty. Thank you.
Rebuttal?